As someone who has the opinions that I do based on the evidence and the education that I have accrued throughout my life, I have come across a lot of bad faith talking points. And why these talking points are bad faith? Because people that are saying it are only just repeating the things that they've been told, usually by a millionaire that's paid by a billionaire on TV. If it's not, it's usually through the education, which tries to perpetuate the system that we're currently in, which only benefits the top 1%, the parasitic class that some people like to call the elite. You might ask, why did I call them the parasitic class? Well, because their wealth is based off the backs of working class people. Without working class people, those people don't accrue any wealth at all. An empty factory doesn't produce any value. However, workers in a factory produce the value. So the factory owner who is exploiting the workers and exploiting their surplus value of labor, they're the ones that are getting all the wealth and living off the backs of working class people. Let me go through various talking points and I'll show you why they're bad faith. China was communist. In the 70s, they moved their economy to more capitalist policies. Millions of people were starving, and now China is like the second largest GDP on the planet. Okay, China went from a fully agrarian society, fully agrarian country after World War II, to now having the second largest GDP in the world. Okay, first of all. Second of all, China is not a communist country. You might ask, oh my God, they're the Chinese Communist Party though. Yes, that is their name. Just because the Nazis were called the Nationalist Socialist Party didn't mean that they were socialist. China is a socialist transitional government, meaning they are trying to transition from the capitalist system that currently dominates the world to a communist system. They are not communists yet. The definition of communist is a stateless, classless, moneyless society. There has been no country throughout all of history that has ever had that before. There is a joke that economists tell. There are two economists walking through the forest. They come upon a pile of shit. One economist says to the other economist, I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit. The economist says, sure, I'll do it. He eats the pile of shit. They continue to walk. They come up to a second pile of shit. The economist that eat the pile of shit said to the other economist, I'll give you $100 if you eat that pile of shit. The second economist eats the pile of shit. One economist says, you know, we both ate, but I feel like we didn't really get anything out of it. The other economist goes, well, the GDP went up $200 though. That gives you an idea that GDP maybe doesn't really mean that much. China in the 1980s opened up their economy, meaning they allowed foreign investment into the country. However, they put a lot of stipulations on these foreign investors. The United States government is run by and for the corporations, not for the working class people. The Chinese government is running the corporations for the benefit of all of Chinese society, which is why you've seen a dramatic growth within their economy over the last few decades. There's nothing inherently wrong with capitalism. It's the corrupt cronyism where the government has their hands in everything and it absolutely ruins everything that works with capitalism, which is a lot. Okay. All right. Bottom line up front, cronyism is capitalism. It's copium to say that they're two separate things. Capitalism is in the name. It's all about propping up capital. They don't have any long-term plans. All they want to do is to get as much profit and squeeze as much blood out of the rock as possible. Now, these profits are just the exploitation of the working class people that provide the surplus value of labor. In theory, you have a free market where you have free entry, free exit. However, what happens is that you get a corporation or a company who then buys up all the other companies within its industry and then becomes a monopoly. The incentives for capitalism leads to the cronyism, leads to the corruption. The entire goal of capitalism is to have a monopoly. Capitalism always leads to a monopoly. There is zero exception. When it becomes a monopoly, it could set any price it wants. This is what we're seeing nowadays with the fall of mom and pop stores to major multinational corporations who are just raising the prices because they can. On top of that, they then underpay their workers, so all the value that their workers are creating go to the tippy top in that parasitic class, which I talked about earlier. In order to continue that system, these companies and corporations and this parasitic class then corrupt the government to make sure that the government passes as many policies as possible to line their pockets as quickly and as much as possible. Cronyism is capitalism. I have a degree in this subject. I study the economies of these countries and ours. Socialism has failed in every attempt it has ever been implemented in. Let me address this. Every attempt for socialism that has happened in the past has had a severe thumb on the scale from the Western imperialist countries who try to make these socialist governments fail. Why do they do that? Well, they do that because if a socialist government were to succeed, then the citizens and residents of these Western powers would then try to do the same thing and overthrow the hierarchy that these Western powers have embedded for decades and have continued to oppress working class people, particularly since the 1980s. When you say socialism has failed at every attempt, it has failed at every attempt because Western imperial countries who have a capitalist system have done everything in its power to make sure it failed. For example, the Chilean coup in 1973, which overthrew Salvador Allende, it was going to use a centralized government to plan various economic productions to ensure that all the needs of its people were met, as well as potentially implementing trade policy to make sure that its people receive the fruits of its labor. The Korean War, after World War II, as well as the Vietnam War, was Western imperial powers, mostly the United States, trying to squash any kind of socialist government from forming in North Korea and North Vietnam. The United States poured millions and millions and millions of dollars, thousands and thousands and thousands of lives to try to ensure that any kind of socialist government would not be successful. The United States ultimately ended up pulling out of Vietnam. The North Vietnamese implemented a socialized government where Vietnam sees a higher home ownership rate. So that is even one example of a socialist country that has worked. China has implemented socialist transitional policies, now is on track to surpass the United States. Cannot sit there and say that socialist governments have never worked when you literally have Vietnam and China sitting right there staring at you in the face. When you say China is now capitalist, and then when someone says, well, then we should do things like China, you turn around and say, no, that's communist, that doesn't make any sense. Cuba has implemented the closest thing to a communist government. Despite having an embargo on it implemented by the United States for decades, Cuba still sees some of the highest literacy rate. Cuba's healthcare is so good that it sends doctors around the world to help benefit other countries. For example, during COVID-19, Cuban doctors were sent to Italy to help the COVID-19 crisis that was spreading across the country. Cuba also believes that it potentially found a vaccine to cure some forms of lung cancer. However, the United States has prevented it from being tested to be implemented. If socialist and communist policies and socialist and communist governments are eventually going to fail, why do capitalist countries keep putting their thumb on the scale? Why don't they just let them fail and then the capitalist countries can come in at the end and be the heroes? If it's going to fail, why not let it fail? The government exists to protect your inalienable rights. What inalienable rights are they? I like what the Declaration of Independence says: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If the government is implementing policies which are pushed by corporations and businesses, where 68,000 people die every year because they can't get adequate health care, Yale School of Public Health has produced a study that shows universal health coverage could save $1 trillion and save 114,000 lives every single year. I don't think that's the government doing its job. Maybe you think I'm crazy. We have an overabundance of food. But under the current capitalist system, 9 million people go starving every year. Why are 9 million people going starving every single year around the world? Please make that make sense to me. Governments not only have an obligation to its own individual people, but it also has obligation to the human rights of a people around the world. If something is fucked up, governments should be standing up for those people. Do you think the Holocaust would have happened if European countries stood up and found out what Hitler did instead of catering to him and letting him do whatever the hell he wanted? The New York Times praised Hitler throughout his rise of power in the 1930s. Do you think if the New York Times actually wrote what Hitler was doing, do you think the United States might have put pressure on its European allies to say, like, hey, maybe we should have let him come to power. Maybe we should push back on him. Maybe we should implement sanctions on him. Maybe we should make sure that he doesn't get any more power and hurt more people. I totally agree that the US government has failed its people, but not through lack of social programs, I think. It wasn't the billionaires and 1% that made us broke. The government keeps printing money and devaluing our dollar. Rich people cannot print money, or believe me, they would. Top 5% of earners pay over 60% of all tax revenue. I think the American people are tired of seeing their tax dollars be wasted on overfunded militaries, forever wars across the globe, and programs that are wasteful. Okay, where to start with this? The billionaires and the 1%, by definition, have made working class people in the United States broke. Do you know why? Because the value that working class people have provided for their companies is then stolen by the people that own the company. Your boss is never going to pay you the same amount of money to live in the same neighborhood as them. The boss makes $1, you make a dime. They are the reason that we are broke. When we had policies in the New Deal where we taxed the living out of the parasitic class when they made too much money, it created a robust middle class and created the American dream that everybody strives for to this day. The American dream is dead. The government keeps printing money and devaluing our dollar. Okay, let me explain why this is stupid. These are the same people that say that US currency should be backed by gold. You cannot do this. Money is used because it's more efficient distribution of resources. It's better than trading a pen for 2 pencils when we could just be like, okay, the pen is $1, the pencil are 50 cents. That is why money exists. If you have a gold standard set backing the dollar, then you cannot invest in the future of your country. When you implement investment into the IRS, every dollar put into the IRS, you get $7 back. Everybody for decades has been saying the US government is going to collapse because they're printing money. It has not happened. Economists literally do not have an explanation for why it has not happened.
To be perfectly frank, we do not, at least I do not, I don't want to talk for the profession. We've had this steady decrease in the interest rate since the mid-80s, continuing a bit more in the crisis, but, continuing now. And we have no explanation.
You can't use this argument if people have been using the argument for decades. People have been saying China's going to collapse any day now for the last several decades. Has China collapsed? No. It is literally the second largest economy in the fucking world. Cannot use these arguments that have been used for fucking decades when they haven't come to fruition. The only thing that conservatives conserve are fucking talking points. It's the same shit that you're trying to implement right here with this bad faith talking point. The top 5% earners pay over 60% of all tax revenue. They should pay more. They should pay more of the tax revenue because they break the backs of working class people and take the surplus value that those workers created for them. If they're not going to pay their workers, then the least they can do is pay into the tax revenue, which then we can use to implement into our education system, into infrastructure. They use a ton more than regular working class people for all the deliveries of all their products and everything like that, as well as the military, which then implements coups in foreign countries to secure resources for their fucking companies. That is the least that the top 5% can fucking do. They're using the resources of our government to do all the things to make sure that they line their pockets. The American people are tired of seeing their tax dollars wasted over funded militaries. Yes, they're seeing $1 trillion going into the American military and watching everything in the United States crumble. The New Deal was an incredible infrastructure investment into the future of the United States of America. And the United States has been relying on that infrastructure since then and has not properly maintained it. Everything is fucking falling apart. The education system is fucking dog shit. We do not fund education, which is why you are probably implementing these bad faith talking points. And you can't do critical thinking to find out that these are bad faith talking. Every investment into education will make society better in the future. A well-educated society can make the proper choices to see when people are lying to them. These policies aren't working. We need to vote people in that have better policies. This is why we need to fund more education, not continue to fund guns, not continue to fund coups around the world, not to continue to exploit countries in the global south. Because ultimately, imperialism is the last stage of capitalism. The biggest problem is we have that Americans have been convinced there are sides instead of uniting together for common sense and positive change. We are being tricked into hating each other. And that's from the government also. Divided population is a controllable population. Not completely wrong. Lyndon B. Johnson says, not only can you convince the poorest white person that they are better than someone who is dark, they will also put money in your pocket as you. Yes, I paraphrased it, but that is still held true to this day. When they are implementing wedge issues, such as abortion and LGBTQ plus issues, a vast majority, a super majority of Americans agree that LGBTQ plus people deserve human rights just like everybody else, as well as people deserve the right to have an abortion. And then the media manufactures consent and says, oh, it's actually a 50-50 issue when it's not. They do it to drive ratings and to drive us apart because the big thing that they don't want to happen is that they don't want a united working class. There are sides in the United States. There is the capitalist class and the working class. The working class creates the value for the capitalist class. Without the working class, the capitalist class doesn't have any of the wealth that it has. Abraham Lincoln said in his first address to Congress after being elected, capital does not exist without labor. Labor comes first. Respectfully, of course, capitalism is good, not perfect, but better than any system out there. The current failures in the United States all stem from cronyism, not capital. Capitalism was better than feudalism, but there is a better system that is going to replace capitalism. I don't know if it's going to be socialism. I don't know if it's going to be communism. Now, the problem is that capitalism has run rampant, that the top 1% continues to oppress working class people around the world, oppress the global south to make sure that they line their pockets and have an infinite growth model. There are limited resources on this planet, which means infinite growth isn't possible. Why do we keep pretending that it's a thing? Yes, people will say the Scandinavian countries, oh, they have a good system. They have a social democratic system, good social welfare, funding education, funding healthcare, all this stuff. It is all based on the backs of the global south and exploiting global south. There's a better system that we as a united working class people around the world can implement to make sure we are all taking care of our necessities. Once again, cronyism is capitalism. Capitalism is not a good system unless you're a capitalist. It's in the goddamn fucking name. How does capitalism help the people that don't have capital? Capital is the basis of the entire system. Your boss is not going to pay you the same amount of money to live in the same neighborhood as them. It's just never going to happen because they're going to try to pay you as little as possible to get you to work as hard as possible. The worker is trying to get paid as much as possible and work as little as possible. Those will conflict. This is a contradiction that capitalism will inevitably have. I haven't been satisfied by our leadership here in the United States for many decades. You are advocating for the system that the leadership in the United States over the last several decades has cemented and pushed on you. Yes, you may have a degree in all this stuff, but the problem is your degree is based on the neoliberal policies that the United States ingrain in your head that this is the best system. I also have economic background in my education. How does my education allow me to have critical thinking and see that there's inherent contradictions within capitalism that will eventually collapse capitalism, and you continue to advocate for capitalism? Cronyism is one of the branches of capitalism. It is still capitalism. The only proper way to run things is to run things by and for the people. To put people in power that will be held accountable through elections or through the law to make sure that its people see wealth and prosperity. Currently, under the United States system and under capitalism itself, gains are privatized and losses are socialized. In the 2008 financial crisis, the United States government bailed out all the fucking banks and said, fuck you to all the working class people that were screwed. That has happened time after time after time after time. In COVID-19, when they put out the PPP loans for all small businesses, which were then exploited by corporations and multimillionaires, the United States government forgave those debts, those PPP loans. But as soon as working class people asked for forgiveness of student loans, everybody was up in arms. Why can we forgive debts of capitalists, but we can't forgive the debts of working class people, where it actually increases production of those companies? My thoughts are the amount of waste that comes from government spending leads me to believe that American people have more skin in the game to spend their money better and more efficiently than the government is doing. You're partially correct. The thing that you're advocating for is less taxes. If you do less taxes, that gives wealthier people more money to fuck with you. The American people will not invest money into infrastructure or into healthcare or into education, which is why you as a society decide together to all pay into a large pool that will then fund that stuff. Universal healthcare is easy. I would much rather pay 4% in taxes to make sure my healthcare is covered, to make sure your healthcare is covered, to make sure my neighbor's healthcare is covered, to make sure the person across the state's healthcare is covered, to make sure the people across the country's healthcare is covered. I would much rather pay 4% than what I'm currently paying, which comes out to about 12% of my income. We need to take care of everybody. That includes the parasites, that includes Nazis, that includes leftists, that includes conservatives. I think we should take care of everybody. I think everybody's necessities should be taken care of. I think people should have a roof over their head. Maybe it's a house, maybe it's an apartment. 700,000 people in the United States experienced homelessness. 700,000 people. How can you say you're the richest country in the world and have homeless people? China doesn't have a homelessness problem. They take care of their people. They have over a 90% home ownership rate. Why don't we implement those policies? I think people should have a roof over their head before anybody has a property that they can make a profit from. Once again, I said corporations and companies run the United States government. They will charge whatever it takes in contract from the United States government. The United States government, the politicians will overlook it because those companies are then funding their super PACs to make sure that those people continue to get elected. This is why government waste continues to happen. When China negotiates drug prices for its universal health care, the Pharmaceutical companies come in, they say, this is the price that we're going to charge. And the Chinese government says, no, 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 no. You can do better. You're going to charge us less. And guess what the pharmaceutical companies do? They say, okay, so why can't we do that here in the United States? People will say that the United States funds all the research and development for all the other people around the world. Why do we settle for that? Because the pharmaceutical companies continue to line the pockets and make sure that politicians that they influence continue to get elected. I agree we need to fix the money, and money keeps becoming more useless as the government keeps printing at a record clip. All the problems with rent, housing, food prices, wages, they all stem from the record devaluation of the dollar. No, it doesn't. It doesn't stem from that. It stems from greed. It stems from greed of the capitalists that you continue to defend. If you're going to defend capital, at least get paid for it. Because if you're doing it for free, you're just a fucking bootlicker that isn't going to benefit from the system. You're not part of the team. I hate to break it to you. You're not a temporary embarrassed millionaire. You're not. You're not. You should be advocating for yourself. You should be advocating for your neighbor, advocating for your coworker. If we come together as working class people and realize there are more of us than there are of the parasitic class, then we will get the policies that will make all of our lives easier and be able to actually get the necessities taken care of for us. I highly recommend everyone look at diversifying into some PMs and or affordable crypto, which has outperformed the dollar in almost every metric. All right, let me explain crypto. Crypto's currency is a speculative asset. What is a speculative asset? It means that the prices of it is based on speculation. Speculation, not evidence, not statistical evidence, but speculation. Cryptocurrencies are not backed by anything. It has a high variability, which is why sometimes you see it outperforming stable currencies like the US dollar. The US dollar is backed by the United States military and the United States government itself. Cryptocurrencies, not backed by anything. So guess what's going to happen? If a working class person goes in and invests in crypto, then somebody that has a shit ton of money is going to pump and dump that. And then you're going to be out on all your savings. That's what's going to happen. Because that has happened literally over the years. NFTs, cryptocurrency, all of it has happened. It's all scams. It's all a scam. Cryptocurrency is no different than any of the foreign currency that is currently being traded on the open market, with the exception that cryptocurrency isn't backed by anything. This is not financial advice. This is just me explaining to you, in my critical thinking abilities, what cryptocurrency is. Yes, every man person will always make better buying and saving decisions, and not the government. There's a thing called the velocity of money. The velocity of money basically says that working class people will spend money at a faster clip than those who have wealth. This is why when you are having a down economy, you give as much money to working class people as possible because they will spend them, whether it's for bills, they'll go out to restaurants, they'll get luxury. Government is more efficient at spending than you as an individual person. For example, healthcare. If the United States government has a universal healthcare policy that is 350 million people under its policy, it could then go to insurance companies and healthcare providers and say, hey, we have all these people. This is what you're going to charge for these procedures. If you can't do that, we're not coming to you. Like I gave in the example earlier, where the pharmaceutical companies go to the Chinese government and the pharmaceutical companies said, hey, we're going to charge this. And the Chinese government goes, no, you're going to charge this. Because that pharmaceutical company is going to get all of its money from the vast amount of people that it will then be able to provide healthcare to. Hate to check yes on all the boxes for social programs when we keep seeing grift, fraud, and waste in government spending. For example, the public school system has the highest funding in history, and our children have the worst results in history. We have more people in the United States than it has ever been in history. The United States education system has been gutted for the last 40 fucking years. And why it has been gutted the last 40 years? Because Ronald Reagan had an assistant come up to him and say, hey, we need to stop publicly funding college education. And he said, the reason we need to stop funding it is because we're creating an educated proletariat. He was saying this because an educated proletariat will realize that it's getting exploited by the people above them and will overthrow the system that is perpetuating the oppression of them. The United States has defunded the living shit out of public education. They have made sure that we have had worse results so they can continue to exploit us. A more educated society realizes it's being exploited and will not stand for it. They do not want that to happen, which is why they continue to defund education. Yes, you can say we have the highest funding for education in all of society, but you said yourself, inflation has gone up. We should have universal education. I'm not saying college is for everybody, but everybody who wants to increase their knowledge should get an opportunity. We have universal education from K through 12th grade. Why don't we extend that from K through 16th grade? When you invest in education, you provide a benefit to society as a whole. Why are we gatekeeping knowledge? Why are we gatekeeping potentially critical thinking skills? Why are we gatekeeping somebody who has grown up in a poor neighborhood who potentially could cure cancer someday? Again, I'm not saying college is for everybody. I think some kind of post-secondary education is important, whether it be a trade school, whether it be a community college, whether it be a four-year college, whether it be a master's, whether it be a PhD. When you go to an education outside of where you grew up, you get to see how other people live. Not only do you get a academic education, but you get a social education where you get to see how other people live and understand and empathize with other people. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the divide and conquer mentality of American politics and dividing us amongst race, amongst religion, amongst all this stuff. When you actually meet people that you have never met before and understand they're human beings just like me and you, they're just trying to have a good life. They're just trying to have a roof over their head. They're just trying to provide for their kids. They're just trying to put food on the table. That leads to empathizing with them. Undocumented immigrants are just like you and I. They're just trying to find a better life. The only difference between an undocumented immigrant and a documented immigrant is paperwork. They continue to make undocumented people jump through all these hoops to get documented so they can threaten to deport them. They're just working class people trying to provide for their family. The U.S. mail, it's the same story. I believe 9 million in controllable losses. The United States Postal Service is a service. It's not supposed to make money. It's supposed to be a postal service that is guaranteed within the Constitution itself. Without the Postal Service, people would not get their medication because under a capitalist system, the private deliverers, which is like UPS and FedEx, would not deliver to Timbuktu in the middle of nowhere. They would not be able to get life-saving medication that they need. The reason that the United States Postal Service has an immense loss is because they implemented policies that the United States Postal Service has to show all of the retirement services that is providing all of its employees on the books. The United States Postal Service is the only government services that has to show this stuff on the book, which is why it shows an enormous loss. Thankfully, this provision was repealed in 2022. This is because UPS and FedEx and other private delivery companies lobbying the government to make sure that the United States Postal Service failed. This is neoliberal austerity. They defund public services, saying, oh, it's operating at a loss, and then eventually they're going to privatize it. They're going to sell it for parts, and it's going to be a way worse service. This is what happens under capitalism. Yes, you're going to say it's cronyism. Cronyism is capitalism. Humans have been getting replaced by automation since the assembly line. There will always be valuable human work. Also, with the Depop numbers coming through, I think we will all be working very hard and getting paid a lot more before the automation takeover is coming. But at some point, there will be some UBI in play. As a society, we haven't earned that part yet. Maybe we never will. Innovations in technology have only historically benefited the capitalist class. Production in the United States has skyrocketed. Wages have stagnated. There is a massive difference between the production and the wages. Where do you think that money has gone to? To the capital-owning class. The production that working class people have created has not been felt by working class people. It has only gone to the wealthy, parasitic class. Innovations in technology should go towards making people work less hours and getting paid the same. The thing that working class people are running out of is time. Those in the capitalist class have all the time in the world. Working class people should get time and be able to enjoy their actual lives with their family. Why do only one parasitic class get to do that? Why do landlords continue to charge rent on working class people and live off the backs of working class people and don't provide shit? Yes, I said landlords don't provide. They just got lucky that they had enough capital to put a down payment on some kind of property. They then charge someone who is working class. Landlords don't do anything. Their lifestyle is subsidized by working class people. Without working class people, those people cannot live and do not produce anything for society. People that produce housing are the workers that build the housing. It's not the people that own the housing. The people that build the housing are the ones that produce that housing. Don't get big mad. We're all friends. You're not my enemy. You are my enemy. Anybody that advocates against working class people is my enemy because ultimately you're going to side with capital. That is what police officers are. Police officers are working class traders. Police officers defend capital. They will always side with the oppressor unless they decide to cross the line and become working class and unite with the working class. If you are against the working class people, I don't see you as a friend. I see you as an obstacle. Maybe I convince you to my side. Maybe I don't. If you're going to stand in the way of working class people getting their necessities taken care of, then I'm not going to see you as a friend. One problem is the easiest way to get rich is through exploitation of people, animals, and the planet's resources. Totally, I agree. There needs to be some rules. You are advocating for a system where there is less rules, less tax. Then at the same time, you say there needs to be rules. Which is it? Can you be consistent? That's all I'm asking for. So if you want a ton of rules to rein people in, that is fucking socialism. I don't have an issue with the free markets being implemented for luxury goods. Necessities should be taken care of though. Obviously, we're going to put rules within reason on those luxury goods and people making money on those luxury goods and making sure that people aren't exploiting people producing those luxury goods. But as long as people's necessities are taken care of, then fine. But if you're going to sit here and tell me, actually, we need to implement more rules as I advocate for a system which calls for more deregulation, that doesn't make any sense to me. Which one is it? You can't have both. I would love all of us to become wealthy people, whatever wealth means to you. I think we can all do it in an honest way with hard work and ingenuity. I hear the eat the rich thing so much. I just think it's another trick of division. We've been told by the government that the rich are somehow not paying their fair share, but the data shows they're paying almost all the U.S. tax revenue. Brother, tax revenue doesn't fucking matter when they are the ones receiving all of the production that the United States has been producing. They should pay 100% of the tax revenue because they're the ones that are receiving all of the production value that the working class people are providing for them. They should be paying more in taxes. They're not paying their fair share. They are the ones that are using the roads to deliver goods. Those roads are paid for by our tax money. Why should I pay for roads so that someone working above me can profit off of it? Should they not be paying for that? Eat the rich is a simplified version of taxing the shit out of the rich, which is what we did during the New Deal and created a robust middle class. The United States economy from the 1940s through the 1970s was the best in the world. It was so good that post-World War II, European governments literally used it as a template to implement the current system. Pretty much everybody has universal healthcare and universal education. Now, European countries are implementing United States policies which have been implemented over the last 40 to 50 years of austerity. Their quality of life is decreasing. It is almost like neoliberal policies, which you are advocating for, which you have been taught getting your degree is bad.
I don't understand. Even after all our cuts, national debt has doubled and economic growth is terrible.
Maybe austerity doesn't work?
You can say that you haven't been brainwashed, but someone who has literally worked in the academic field of economics has literally said that you have to have neoliberal economics in order to move up academics before you can eventually say, hey, there's a problem with the systems that we're currently running. You need to tax the rich. Gary Ace Economics has literally said this. I have no respect for billionaires who are wasteful. If you have assets, food, let's find a way to get it to the most needy. Brother, if you are saying you have no respect for billionaires and you said the most needy need something, we need to figure out how to divide their assets properly, that means tax the billionaire. You literally just said we don't have to tax the rich more. They pay enough tax revenue as it is. You're advocating to tax the rich. What the fuck else would you do? Most billionaires are relatively cash broke and their entire wealth is tied up in their companies and holdings, etc. Tax their assets. No, actually, it's just a bunch of assets. We can't tax that. Yes, we can. We have no problem doing it with property taxes. And if they can't fucking afford the tax, then they need to sell their holdings like regular working class people do when they have to pay their taxes. Why do you continue to cater for a system that makes them wealthier? You're saying the problem is cronyism, but you're still advocating for the same policies. Make it make sense. Choose a side. If you continue to sit on the fence, you're eventually going to end up impaled. You're not a temporary embarrassed millionaire. Odds are you're a working class person and you're getting fucked over by your boss. Stop advocating for that benefits your boss and fucks over you and your coworkers and your neighbors. So, those are my takes on some of the bad faith talking points that I consistently hear from. If you like some of the things that I'm saying, feel free to come by my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/neg_ghost_rider. We usually play a bunch of video games while we talk about a whole bunch of different shit. I also do react content to YouTube videos, news and politics, and everything in between. There's not really a lot of topics that we don't cover over there, so feel free to swing by.